Good afternoon, seventh grade. We are ready for our last day of World War II. We're going to look at section 3, the consequences of the war. Go ahead and change this up to be bigger. Section 3, consequences of the war. We will be finishing the chapter today, Lord willing, and then we'll spend the next 2 days reviewing in various forms. One day I might do a video, the next day I might do some Quizlets or Kahoots or something like that for you to review. Well, the test will not go live until Friday. Okay, but first of all, we need to look at the consequences of this war. We finished World War II yesterday. We had VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, May 8th, 1945. VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, September 2nd, 1945. And these two horrific wars are finally over with. But war leaves scars. So let's talk about some of those scars. Let's talk about the long-term consequences of a war, of specifically World War II. First of all, the first consequence is that this is going to be the beginning of the atomic age, the age of atomic weapons. We live in it. We feel that constant, although not fear, and we'll talk about this more in the next chapter, how there was a period after World War II where people lived in fear that one country or another was going to use an atomic bomb on the other. We don't have that kind of constant fear, but we still do live in the atomic age when nuclear weapons can be used. The United States, of course, used their atomic weapons at the end of World War II to bring it to a more swift end. But Russia also got atomic weapons as a result of World War II, but they stole theirs. When they moved into Germany, they took the German scientists who had been working on atomic weapons for Germany and forced them to finish the technology for them. They also stole secrets from Americans. There will be eventually, and I'm not sure if we talk about this in the next chapter or not, but there will be 2 American citizens who were convicted of selling the secrets of atomic weapons to the Soviets. They are the Rosenbergs, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. But not only does it affect these countries, and now there are multiple countries in the world with nuclear capacities, including questionably North Korea, where, does Kim Jong-un have nuclear capacity or not? That's still up in the air. We don't know. He says he does. But it also is going to affect our strategies for future wars, because if you go into a war thinking that another country has the possibility of landing a nuclear weapon in your country, you're going to think twice about that. You are not going to approach war with the same easy mentality as we did before the atomic age. Okay, so it does affect your strategies for future war. Another long-term consequence of World War II is what is called the Cold War. And our next chapter is going to go into this in a lot of detail. But first of all, we need to define what Cold War is. Cold War is a political rivalry between 2 or more countries that doesn't actually break out in war. There is not fighting between soldiers, okay? It is just that uneasy tension. You know what it's like if you are fighting but not really physically fighting with a sibling. You're just disagreeing on everything. It's that kind of feeling. It's that tension that's so thick in a room you think you can slice it with a knife. Cold War, okay? So Cold War is what began here at the end of World War II. And as I said, we're going to spend a lot of time on it in the next chapter, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on it now. But the third consequence I want you to consider is disillusionment. The people who were alive at the end of World War II had been through many of them had been through World War I, where they'd seen such total destruction. They get to the end of World War II. World War I killed 20 million people. World War II killed 50 million. They'd just seen all of this destruction and they were completely disillusioned. They felt like life had no meaning or purpose. And it was best expressed in the works of people like artists like Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock developed a type of art called abstract expressionism, where he literally, in many of his paintings, would randomly splash wet paint on canvas. Just splash it. There it is. It had no meaning, no purpose, no definition to it at all. And then there were men like Albert Camus. He was a French philosopher who wrote stories about absurd things. He thought that since people valued what is meaningless, he reasoned that people value what is meaningless, since all people value their own life, and life just ends in death, so therefore it's meaningless. What a discouraging way to live, to think that your life has no meaning. And I assure you that that is not the case. Every life has meaning before God. Why would you want to go on if that was the way you felt about your life? Okay, so let's look at economic changes. France and Britain lost most of their colonies as a result of the wars. By 1960, most of Africa will be free. They will no longer have colonies there. Most of Eastern Asia is already free as a result of the end of World War II. So these two countries are going to really have to rebuild their economic infrastructure. They're not going to get cheap natural resources anymore. They're going to have to go out and find those. There's also political changes, though, because these countries, namely France and Britain, as well as others, Europe is no longer dominating the world. They are not in charge. It is really, all of life is going to boil down to, from the end of World War II through today, two superpowers. Two. The United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is no longer. It is now called Russia. But it is no longer considered a superpower. But we had these two strong political powers, and they're controlling the rest of the world. We are also going to see that within these political powers, let me go back for just a second, these two superpowers are the difference. Their sides are democracy, like the United States, or communism. And they're going to fight each other constantly in this Cold War. Okay? The other thing that we're going to see is a return to materialism. And remember what materialism is. It's that idea that I need more stuff. Stuff is going to make me happy. But there are also going to be some philosophical consequences to World War II. And this is going to get kind of deep, so bear with me and try to understand, okay? Idealism is going to be abandoned. That idealism is the thought that everything in life is getting better. That that people are good, that my neighbors are good people, and everything is just great. That's going to be abandoned. We've just watched 70 million or more people in the world die as a result of war. And what's going to replace that idealism is called relativism. Relativism. Now, you need a definition for relativism. And my notes don't provide it, so make sure you add it in, okay? Relativism means that values are not absolute, but they're different for each person. What's true for me is not necessarily true for you. That is what relativists believe. It is not biblical. It is not true, okay? Relativism is the idea, as I said, it's the idea that what's true for you might not be true for me. You might say that the sky is blue, but I say it's orange. Okay? That truth is relative. It matters to the individual. Not all truth is the same. This is not true. It is not biblical. Okay? Existentialism goes along with that. And existentialism stresses a person's uniqueness while encouraging free choice and accepting the consequences of that choice. You can choose to do whatever you want to do. but you have to accept the consequences of that choice. Okay? That is existentialism. You are free to determine your own values. If you decide that it is okay to go whatever speed you want to on Atlanta roads, then that is your free choice. That is a relativist. An existentialist would say that that's fine. You go free choice. You go whatever speed you want to, but you also have to accept the consequences of that choice. You might get thrown in jail if you're going 120 on the interstate. Okay? Makes sense, I hope. It probably won't make full sense because we all come from a biblical worldview where we don't think of these things as being true, and they're not. Okay? But this is what some people believed. A couple of the key people that we need to know about are Jean-Paul Sartre. He was a let me go back. Where in my notes is he? Here he is. He was a famous existentialist. He believed in this concept that, you know, you're free to make your own choices. And he wrote a book called Being in Nothingness, where he encouraged people to reject the illusions that deceive them. Just reject them. Just throw them out. God, you don't like the idea of God, just throw it out. Well, that's not very good idea, is it? Okay? But that's Jean-Paul Sartre. There's also going to be, as you can imagine, if people are embracing the idea of relativism, there's going to be some religious consequences to that too. Because if we reject the idea of God, then where are we? Okay? Atheism is going to grow during this time. But we started discrediting the teaching that man is basically good. We saw man's evil in World War II. Okay? Many people can now see that no, man is not basically good. But some of them also question the idea of God. Does God even exist? And many of these were even Jewish people who you can understand after all of the torture and the horrific conditions that they lived through, why they would reject the idea of God. But that does not mean God doesn't exist. But Christianity at this time did grow because many soldiers had seen so much bad things on the battlefield that they came home wanting to find God, or they had found God in that bunker or on that battlefield, and they came home ready to serve him and spread the gospel around the world. All right, I got 2 minutes. I got to finish up. Total war was bad. It cost a massive amount of human life. 35 million people, citizens, died in World War II. 35 million, that is so many people, whether it was through bombings or disease or through murder or famine or whatever, 35 million people. Not even worth mentioning, but the destruction of property. $500 billion worth of damage to buildings and property in Europe. But the big thing is that loss of human life. Okay? And that does it for chapter 18. We will spend the next 2 days reviewing, and then we will have a test on World War II. Remember, I told you, you have 4 dates you need to know. Okay? Don't forget those. Keep working on them. I'll see you later.